All welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to teach you about the expected questions in an interview section for those who have cleared the mains of IBPS SO, especially the law officers. Basically about me, I'm Blessan. Right now I'm working as a legal consultant for NABARD. I've had the experience of giving interviews to various public sector organizations like UCO Bank, Bank of India, Union Bank, NABARD, and also Airports Authority of India. So I have a fairly good knowledge about what will be the questions that will be asked, what are the questions that you can expect to be asked in an interview of the IBPS SO. So this is a very basic introductory video. This is not an elaborate video. I'm going to give about the topics in law or subject which could be asked and a brief overview of that. In detail in upcoming videos, I'll be explaining each and every topic in detail. So the most important thing that I would want everybody to note is certain basic things is that as a law officer you would be expected to interpret and deal with range of laws, not necessarily specific to banking laws but range of laws. You should be knowing whichever law you should be knowing, that you should be having a good grasp of the subject. Having said that, now let us see some of the laws which can be tested in interview. One is the Banking Regulation Act 1949, and we all know this Banking Regulation Act is the bedrock or pillar of the recognition of banking. So here some of the sections like section 35A, which is the power of Reserve Bank to give directions. This is the sections under which Reserve Bank gives most of the directions to the banks which is under its control. And some of the functions of RBI, licensings under section 22 of Banking Regulation Act, and its inspection powers. So all these things could be tested. Of course, I would say that you need to be elaborate about it, but at least in Banking Regulation Act, what can be done by the RBI, what are the powers of RBI, you should know, because you can expect questions in these lines. And like I said, there is no favorite subject for an interviewer. They can ask questions across the line. You could also be expect questions from Competition Act, something which is completely irrelevant, but still you need to know basics of most of the laws. As a law officer you would be expected to interpret. Next is the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. We all know the Reserve Bank of India is the apex regulator for all the banks, and it is also the one which sets the monetary policy, controls this currency circulation in our country. So we must know the Reserve Bank of India, and again it's some basics, very basics, not necessarily you should be knowing extremely in depth, but basics. Next is the Negotiable Instruments Act. Again, this is an act which is very specific. Some of the questions that you can expect from this act is the key definitions like holder and holder in due course, and then you can also expect definitions of bills of exchange, check. On all those definitions you must be knowing. So, and this is very important in Negotiable Instruments Act. And the most important thing about Negotiable Instrument Act is the check bounce cases and its special sections, most widely known as section 138. And if you know, even the lawyers or advocates, they all the check bounce cases are mentioned as 138 case. 138 cases is a special case under Negotiable Instrument Acts. And what are the sections and what is the special procedure given? It's quasi criminal it's quasi criminal way of dealing with this check bounce cases. It is not entirely criminal, not necessarily entirely civil. So using the best of the both worlds, and some other things that you have to know. And also section 141, where companies are involved. So basically these things you must know before going to an interview as a law officer in banks. Moving on, the RTA Act. As a law officer you would be expected to deal with a range of RTA matters. We all know RTA is a landmark act which dealt with right to information. And here some of the things you must know about: exemptions from disclosures. Like I said, right to information is the information that a citizen can get from a public body. So there are certain things that are exempted. So what are those exemptions and what are the grounds for rejections? All these things you should know. Of course, you should know about the sections that deals with this. So this is the things that you can expect from the Right to Information Act. And next, most of the law students would not be aware of these two acts because this is not widely taught in law schools. That is SARFAESI and DRT. But as a law officer dealing in a bank, especially in recoveries, you would be expected to deal with these act, especially the SARFAESI Act, that is Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Assets and Enforcement of Security Interest Act. So it all means that you can enforce the security used in loans, which is when a loan has turned into an NPA. Like, you know, if you go through the traditional civil suit method, it takes years and years for the case to come to a conclusion, which is detrimental to the economy, to the banking sector. So the SARFAESI Act has given fast track method, and where the banks can take possession, banks can sell. There are various sections under it, section 13, and all those things you should know. Some of the days in which you have to wait for, or also the issuance of demand notice, taking possession, how it can be done. Those procedures have a basic idea about that. And then coming to DRT Act, DRT is of course a tribunal exclusively for the collection of debts, and again how the DRT functions, what are the timelines, and especially focus on the appeals process and timelines, and which application is used to file the debt recovery of a person, and also try to focus on the recovery modes and methods in DRT Act. And like I said, if you are a law student and if you have never heard about SARFAESI, DRT, banking regulation, RTA, and if not read it, don't worry, just know the basics, that is enough. Like I said, all your basic law knowledge like criminal, civil, constitution would also come into play, because you would be asked questions on those topics as well. Next, IBC, that is insolvency, another important topic. So in insolvency, what happens is these days the banks, like I said, due to giving huge loans to corporates, and sometimes the corporates might become insolvent and bankrupt, and how to resolve this process. There is a corporate resolution process. What is that? Know basic about how a section 7 application can be done, a CRIP application, and how does liquidation takes place, who are the creditors, what are their rights, and the waterfall mechanism under IBC code, and also the basics of companies law, like you would want to know the difference between a private and public company, directors, roles, duties of directors, and of course companies directors, not the directors who direct the movies. So you need to know their roles, responsibilities, duties, and also certain procedures on the company's law, like what is the difference between special resolution and an ordinary resolution, and how does the resolution takes place, and also little bit of the functioning of the NCLT. So these are very basic. Like I said, when we get into this topic, we can go in depth about what questions can be asked and how it actually functions, and how these laws interact with the law officer in a day-to-day functioning. Next, the basics of business laws, like fundamentals of contracts, what is a basic contract, offer, acceptance, and then things like factors vitiating contracts, misrepresentation, fraud, coercion, undue influence, all those aspects, and what is the way in which contracts can be discharged. So those basic concepts will be tested, can be asked questions on. Then sale of goods acts, partnership, of course it includes limited liability partnership, which is similar to companies law, but it's exclusively for limited liability partnership, and which gives limited liability for the partnerships as opposed to the Partnership Act 1932, then the specific reliefs. So these basics of business laws also can be tested, and very basics of contract law. When does a contract comes in, what is the valid contract offer, all those things can also be tested. And again, like I said, transfer of property is another area which is very important, because as a law officer, and mortgages is one of the basic ways in which banks offer a lot of secured loans. So and if you are a law student, and this is like a very favorite questions, the types of mortgages. This is a very famous question, and can be question asked on equitable mortgage, and simple English, what is the type, what is the difference. So that is very important, because I remember I have been asked these questions at least in 3 law officer examinations. So that is there. And the leasehold rights, the powers of leasehold and leasehold rights, this is also very important. Have a basic look into it. I think section 105 leasehold, like I said, lease would also be part of a mortgage. Then what is the effect? And these days, after the ballooning of NPA in public sector banks or in any banks, and when the loan turns bad, and when you go into that security like mortgages, then there might be plenty of leases, and how to enforce the security, all those things, or something a law officer should know. And most importantly, those interview panel, they would have dealt with this on a day-to-day life, and they would definitely want to ask questions on transfer of property. Next, like I said, as a law officer, one of the basic myths is that you must know only banking laws. No, it's not necessarily like I said. As a law officer, on a day you would face lots of things. You can face the issues relating to your fundamental rights, issues relating to Constitution of India, powers of government, all those aspects. So Constitution is another subject. Don't ignore it. Don't keep it to something else as a subject that only a law student or core law student should learn. You must know the basics of Constitution. Be it any interview, you should know the basics of Constitution of India. So don't ignore it. And you can also know about the government contracts in Constitution, how it happens, and those are the aspects that can be tested. And if you're good, it's a very easy subject, because if you're preparing for any examinations, be it UPSC, IBPS, or any examinations, a polity or Constitution forms the backbone of the preparation. So always keep a basic grasp of it, because you're going to be expected questions in that. And I was asked on, I think, Article 14, like you all know, it's an article on equality. So just know the basics. Next, like I said, civil procedure and criminal procedure. Now again, don't ignore criminal procedure, because it is not necessarily that as a bank law officer you will never come across criminal procedure. You might actually be surprised how much of CRPC would be required, because like I said, in section 138 cases, that is check bounce cases, it is a quasi criminal procedure. It's a quasi criminal offense, and you must know the criminal procedures, like the summary offenses and what is their procedures. And there are lots of frauds in the bank. So many people defraud the banking institutions. So you must know the basics of FIRs, trials, warrant executions. So all these things, basics. So don't neglect the civil procedure, criminal procedure. Like I said, being a very core law subject, you must know this, and it will also be applicable for you in the daily practical aspects of the law officer. And again, the classical torts and consumer protection, consumer rights, unfair trade practice can be tested. Nowadays, e-commerce can also be asked questions on. Torts being a core basic law subject, have a good grasp of negligence aspects in tort, liabilities, vicarious liabilities, some contractual things. So that can also be tested. And consumer protection, like I said, is also a part. Like the banks do come under the purview of consumer commissions, the hierarchy of the consumer commissions and all those things. Even the overlap between ombudsman scheme and consumer rights, all those things can be asked, because ombudsman is another redressal mechanism provided by the RBI for a for a consumer who is not satisfied by the services provided by the bank. Next, arbitration. Again, very basics of arbitration, part 1, and you can be tested on the arbitration agreement, the arbitral tribunals, and how to setting aside of arbitral awards, section 34. So the basics of arbitration is another aspect that you must know, and you can also expect questions on this. Lastly, but not the least, the limitation acts. You would want to believe it or not, with a lot of transfers within the bank, there are cases pending for more than 10 years or 12 years. You want to know the limitation periods of mortgages, contracts, and how essential and how important is it for you to bring the cases in the court. All these aspects you have to know, and it's very important to know the basics of limitation, and of course the labor acts. You need not be as elaborate as like someone who's preparing for a labor commissioner examination in UPSC, but yes, you need to know the labor acts as well. So that's the end of it, and what I would wanted to tell you is keep a basic of all these things, and whatever you have done, whatever preparations you have done for your prelims or mains of SO, that is mostly sufficient. But all the thing is that keep a grasp of it, have the basics in hand, and also keep following the current affairs and things. So this is the basic overview of how, what are the subjects that you are prepared for, specialist officers, especially law officers, and these are the questions, these are the subjects, areas in which the questions can be asked. Now I would be making each and every subject little bit elaborate of what are the things that you must know, so that it could be an easy